Hi, I'm Tom Larimer with Larimer Outfitters, and today I'm going to give you a couple casting pointers, and we're going to talk specifically about your anchor. And we're going to be doing just a snap T cast here, but all of these things that we're going to talk about apply to any casts that are of a waterborne anchor. So your snap Ts, your reverse double spays, regular double spays, reverse snap Ts, and parry pokes. And so real quick, I want to just kind of talk about kind of the basics behind an anchor. And the idea can be sort of translated in roll casting. And basically, when you come up to do a good old-fashioned roll cast, you create all three elements that a Spey cast has. You have an anchor, which is the line on the water in front of you, which is going to give you some grip or resistance when you hit the rod forward. You've got a D-loop, which forms off of the rod tip, and you've got a forward cast. And so basically, the straighter line you can make with those three elements, in other words, getting them all lined up, the more efficient the cast is going to be. If you deviate from that angle, it's going to become less efficient. So that's what's called the 180-degree rule, which most people know about. And so the first goal with your anchor is to put your fly in a position so that when you come around to make your D-loop, it's going to line up not only with the anchor, but your forward cast. So that's a pretty basic rule that most people know about. There's two other rules that I think a lot of people forget about, and these are the ones that we're going to focus on today. So number one, slack is the enemy. Anytime you have slack in the system, bad things are going to happen, because the rod, you can just see this on the water, the rod doesn't start to bend until that slack is picked up. So one common casting mistake I see a lot of people make, especially with their snap T, is they lift and they come down so hard that they get all these squiggles out here in front of them on the water. So when they come around to load that rod, the rod has to pick up all that slack before it actually starts to bend. And so every Spey casting instructor has probably told you to slow down, slow down, slow down. And that's great advice, but oftentimes we forget, why are we going fast? And that's the bigger question. Why am I going fast? Well, if you've got a bunch of slack in that system, you've got to basically move that line that much faster to pick up that slack. So it's key that that line lays out perfectly flat when you make this move. So when I start moving that rod around me, I get instant load. I'm getting that feedback, that sweet feel that we all love to feel when we Spey cast. And you know, everybody out there that's spent any time with a fly rod, they know what a fly rod feels like when it's loaded. And when it's loaded, that's when you take your time and you make nice smooth casts. It's when you have that slack that you end up going much faster, and that just leads to a lot of bad things. So now we've got basically our fly in the position that we want it to be with our 180-degree rule, and we've got this flat line. And before I move on to the last thing, the one thing I will say, the whole key to this flat line is, number one, starting your move very slow and very even, and then making one even acceleration as you come around the snap T move. If you make a drastic start and a drastic stop, you're going to get slack on the water. So it's all about just being smooth and making one smooth acceleration. It's basically a cast you're making. So the last goal, and this is a goal that I think a lot of people miss, is when I do this setup with the snap T, you're going to see a little loop of line form off right off the rod tip, and it's about the size of a basketball, just kind of curling off the rod tip. So what happens in a lot of people's casts is they start moving the rod out over the water first and then get everything beyond them, and they never get that loop of line because the rod tip moves so far beyond their body. So a good way to kind of think about this, if we could just take an imaginary piece of chalk, put it in the end of the rod tip, and we've got a big chalkboard here, we're essentially going to draw a D with the rod tip. So the rod's going to go vertical first, and then around the edge of the D, and then right back to where we started. Now, if we think about our start position, which is straight down below us, and our firing position, if we want to cast that way, our D is going to work within the confines of this triangle. If we wanted to cast further upstream, our D would just become wider, and if I was going to cast further downstream, the D would just become narrower. So by doing that, we get a vertical lift that's nice and smooth. I come right around that D, right back to where I start, and I'll form that loop of line every time I do that. If I start too fast and the rod starts moving across the water first, it's very hard for me to get that rod back downstream, and I never form that loop of line. So that loop of line is so critical because that gives us some line to start ripping. Remember, we talked about moving too fast. Well, if you don't have that loop of line, you don't start loading that rod to somewhere right there in the D-loop cycle. So by having that loop of line down below you, let it settle. Now you've got line that starts loading that rod. Just as soon as you start moving the rod, you're getting that positive feedback on the rod tip, and that helps you just stay smooth and slow. So keep those three things in mind. Get your anchor in the right spot to get that 180-degree rule. Get a nice smooth layout. Form that little basketball shaped loop, and you're going to get great casts. And it doesn't matter if it's a snap tee or if you're doing a reverse double spey. Just look for those three elements, and I guarantee you your spey casting will improve.